This is a World of Warcraft knowledge iceberg. It's a collection of secrets, obscure facts, and hidden bits of lore that get progressively weirder and lesser known the deeper you go down. A few years ago, a Reddit user put together this massive knowledge iceberg. While it's truly a fascinating list, a lot of it leans heavily into obscure mount drops and minor Easter eggs that don't really have much of a story behind them. But I decided to take that framework and build a new iceberg. This version focuses in on deep lore topics, obscure NPC backstories, hidden pop culture references, missing features, lesser known facts, and the world building in general. In this video, we're going to work our way through over 30 entries, all designed to test just how deep your Warcraft knowledge really goes. And hopefully, by the end of it, we'll both be wondering how we ended up this far down the rabbit hole. First up on this list are the Children of Goldshire. This is a group of 6 human kids that seemingly perform an old god ritual right in plain sight across the human starting zone. At exactly 7 AM server time, the 6 children spawn in the Elwyn Forest and start running a specific route around the zone. They go up to the Gates of Stormwind and then come back. They make a few stops along the way, and when they do, they kind of hang round in this weird formation. And then they finally end the route upstairs in the house on Crystal Lake, where they continue to stand in this weird formation. As you go upstairs to look at them, the game starts playing creepy music, and apparently sometimes you can even hear the whispers from the old god, Cthulhu.
You will die.
Eventually they will despawn and disappear. The true explanation behind the Children of Goldshire is rumoured to be an inside joke between Warcraft developing teams, though hard facts behind this creepy event are few and far between. Moving on, the next point on this iceberg list is the Nagrand Orphanage. Hidden in the mountains between Nagrand and Zangarmarsh, there is a small camp run by a troll named Shale. She seemingly runs a small sanctuary orphanage here, where you can see children from almost every playable race in the World of Warcraft running around, playing and sleeping. On the surface it looks innocent enough, but when you look a bit closer, the camp starts to look less like an orphanage and more like a witch's lair, filled with cages and bubbling cauldrons. This creepy vibe was just a fan theory for years, until we visited the alternate timeline version of the universe in the Warlords of Draenor expansion. In the alternate version of Nagrand, we meet an old orc named Garrock, who then reveals that Shale is actually a shapeshifter. He tells us that they grew up together, but while he aged into an old orc, Shale hasn't aged a day. Garrock asks us to investigate her as part of a quest, suspecting she has had something to do with his partner's death. As we play through that quest, we find out he is right. Shale is indeed a life-draining witch who killed his partner to feed on her youth. It's a dark, hidden piece of lore that confirms our worst fears about the peaceful-looking orphanage back in Outland. And all of this kind of suggests that Shale may be a reference to the old witch in the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel. Our next point in this first level of the iceberg is one that a lot more people might be familiar with, the Karazhan Crypts. This area was popularised with the introduction of the dungeon by the same name in the Season of Discovery server of classic World of Warcraft. For that reason, we are going to change the name of this iceberg entry from the Karazhan Crypts to the Forgotten Crypts. It's the exact same place, but it exists in different forms across the different versions of the game. In the main retail world, where the crypts never actually became a dungeon, we find the Forgotten Crypt right behind the Tower of Karazhan. These crypts are a series of tombs and burial grounds that were sealed off just before the original launch of World of Warcraft. But of course, players still found ways to get inside and explore them. Down there they found the Well of the Forgotten, the incredibly creepy upside-down Sinner's Room, where bodies are shackled upside down in a pool of water, and the massive pile of bones in the Pit of Criminals, all giving Karazhan an even more eerie feel than it already had. The crypts were then later officially opened to us mortals when the Legion expansion dropped in 2016. A few years after that, former WoW developer John Statz then revealed to us that the crypts were just simply additional questing areas they didn't end up needing for the launch of Vanilla WoW. And then a few years after that, the space was then finally utilised for the actual dungeon in the Season of Discovery. Next up, Orcs are aliens. Now, the origins of the Orcs are common knowledge for most of us players. how their homeworld of Draenor was slowly dying, and how they were led through the dark portal under the puppet mastery of Gul'dan. But this entry is less about hidden lore and more about a fun perspective shift on the entire franchise. Because the Orcs literally travelled through a cosmic gateway from a distant planet to invade Azeroth, that technically makes them aliens.
Zug zug.
You aren't just playing in the classic medieval fantasy world, you're playing an alien invasion story. I mean, Warcraft, aliens and humans doesn't quite have the same ring to it, but it's still technically accurate and an alternative way to look at the universe, hence why it's made it on this list. Next up, we have the Dancing Troll Village. Before the Cataclysm reshaped the old world, and hidden in the mountains between Darkshore, Felwood, Moonglade and Winterspring, there was a secret troll settlement called Shatterspear Vale. This place is famous for two reasons. The first one being, back in Vanilla WoW, it was almost completely inaccessible. And then the second, the trolls that lived there did nothing but endlessly dance. Their happiness makes a lot of sense when you look back at their lore and the history. About 1,500 years ago, this tribe of trolls cut their ties with the massive Gurubashi Empire. Some of the Gurubashi trolls had just summoned Hakar the Soulflayer, a bloodthirsty lower who was demanding daily sacrifices. Eventually some of the others realised Hakar was a monster, and a Gurubashi troll civil war broke out. Eventually the good trolls managed to defeat and banish the blood god. After Hakar's defeat, the Shatterspear tribe split off and found this hidden location in Kalimdor. They then made a deal with the local night elves. The trolls could live there in total peace if they never left the valley. The Shatterspear tribe agreed and then spent the rest of their days dancing. However, that peaceful existence came to a sudden end during the Cataclysm. With a new war erupting right on their doorstep, the Shatterspear trolls accepted an invitation to join the Horde, throwing themselves straight into the crossfire of the faction war between the Horde and the Alliance, and their sacred dancing village was quickly transformed into a war zone, a state it remains in to this very day. Now, our next entry on level 1 sits in an interesting spot, because you either know this lore inside out, or it's about to completely blow your mind. And there's also a pretty ironic twist here too, considering how we just discussed how the Kalimdor Night Elves ordered a group of trolls to hide away in the mountains forever. The entire Night Elf race, their massive empires, their ancient history, even every Night Elf NPC and every Night Elf character, all originally descended from trolls. 15,000 years ago, a peaceful tribe of dark trolls broke away from the main troll empires and settled near the Well of Eternity. Over generations, exposure to the Well's concentrated arcane energies transformed them. They grew taller, more graceful, their skin turned to shades of violet and purple, and they gained near immortality status alongside a vast intelligence. The dark trolls had evolved into the Night Elves. While it might seem like surface level knowledge to some players, it's also still surprisingly obscure to a lot of other players. If you're interested in the evolution of all of the Warcraft races, there is an amazing chart that was posted to Reddit a few years ago. I will leave it linked in the description below. Our final entry on level 1 of this knowledge iceberg is the first of the pop culture references on this list, the Dalaran sewer turtles. If you were ever down in the Dalaran underbelly, you might have seen a group of small turtles gathered around a single rat. This, of course, is a clear nod to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and their leader, Master Splinter. The turtles and their leader stayed in the underbelly of the city for years, but during the opening events of the War Within expansion, Dalaran was completely destroyed by Xal'atath. Part of that storyline then takes us into the Tranquil Strand on the Isle of Dawn, where we try and help recover what is left from the fallen city. But if you spend enough time searching through the ruins, you can actually find the old sewer rat being tended to by one of the turtles. Later on, they then move to the nearby Freywold village, where you can actually help them by bringing the turtle some fish, who then uses it to heal his master. Doing this eventually unlocks the Dalaran Sewer Turtle Battle Pet, which comes with 4 different visual styles, each turtle wearing a coloured bandana to represent one of the 4 Ninja Turtles. Moving down to level 2 on this World of Warcraft knowledge iceberg, the first entry is going to be the Undercity throne room sounds. If you head over to the ruined palace of the capital city of Lordaeron, right where the entrance to the Undercity is in the Tirisfal Glades, if you go inside the throne room, turn your music down and then crank up your ambient audio, you can start to hear ghostly whispers and eerie echoing sounds. But these aren't just any random creepy noises, they are the literal sounds from the tragic events that took place in this very room during Warcraft 3. Before he merged with the Lich King, Arthas Menethil was the idealistic prince of Lordaeron, trained as a paladin under Uther the Lightbringer and deeply devoted to protecting his people. But when the undead scourge began to plague his kingdom, Arthas' desperate obsession with saving his people became his downfall. After purging the city of Stratholme and chasing the Lich King's forces all the way to Northrend, Arthas then claimed the cursed runeblade, Frostmourne. Doing so, he became one of the Lich King's Death Knights. When he then later returned home, he walked right into that throne room and murdered his own father. When you stand in the ruins of the throne room to this very day, those ghostly ambient sounds you can hear are the echoes of that exact betrayal.
Succeeding you, Father.
Next up is Gillijim's Isle. This refers to a mysterious island that originally sat just off the coast of the Stranglethorn Vale in the very early versions of the game. It can even be seen in the very first trailer for World of Warcraft. The isle came as a pair with another forgotten landmass called the Island of Dr. Lapidus, and both of them were apparently named after Blizzard level designers. The islands shared the exact same vibe, geography and architecture as the Stranglethorn Vale, filled with lush jungles and ruined troll settlements spread across both islands. But unfortunately for us Azeroth explorers, before the game ever launched, both islands were wiped off the map. Next up on level 2 is Timolain's Phylactery. To understand this one, we have to look at the history behind one of the most famous weapons in all of Warcraft lore, the Ashbringer. And stay with me on this one, because this background lore is relevant to both this point and the very next point on this knowledge iceberg. The Ashbringer was forged by King Magni Bronzebeard at the Great Anvil of Ironforge, where it was infused with the pure power of the Holy Light. High Lord Alexandros Mograine was its first wielder, and under his command, the blade became a beacon of hope across Lordaeron during the Scourging. But as powerful as this sword was, it could only be in one place at one time, and this is where the Scarlet Crusade comes in. This fanatical order was desperate for weapons of a similar power scale to the Ashbringer so they could use them to push the Scourge back. To help with arming the Crusade, they ordered a talented human mage named Timolain to create powerful enchanted bows and weapons, setting him up in Hearthglen just outside their base of operations in the Scarlet Monastery. But things quickly took a dark turn here. According to the journals of the Scarlet Crusade's Grand Inquisitor, Isilian, Timolain began secretly experimenting with the same dark necromancy that was being used by the Scourge. He even managed to create an artifact called the Shard of Darkness, a corrupted crystal meant to be the opposition to the holy artifact that was fueling the Ashbringer.
Sorry about all this.
When Isilian discovered what Timolain was up to, he saw it as a threat to the Crusade's cause and took matters into his own hands. They captured the mage in Hearthglen, took him away from the town, and then fed him to a massive vile slime. But as he was being dissolved into the slime, Timolain used his final moments and his forbidden magic to bind his soul to a magical container, a phylactery. Timolain's phylactery could then be looted by players who had killed the very same slime that consumed him, but it was an item that brought you to a seemingly dead end. Because of that mysterious nature, the item would then go on to cause speculation behind its origin and use case until it was then removed in patch 1.7.0. Years later, during the Legion expansion, the item was added back into the game, and it was once again lootable from that vile slime as part of a quest to unlock paladin artifact weapon appearances. When looted and then activated, it summoned the ghostly lich apparition of Timolain, who then explains to us that he was only trying to turn the Scourge's weapons against them before he was killed by the Scarlet Crusade. And all of that lore moves us perfectly on to our next entry in this list, the Corrupted Ashbringer event. During that scourging of Lordaeron, the wielder of the Ashbringer, High Lord Alexandros Mograine, was lured into a deadly trap inside the ruins of Stratholme. His own son, Reno, had been secretly corrupted by the Dreadlord Balnazar, and in a shocking act of betrayal, Reno murdered his father using the Ashbringer, causing the Holy Blade to become instantly corrupted. Sometime later, Kel'Thuzad brought Alexandros back to our world as a Death Knight, doing so to lead the Four Horsemen. He was stationed up in the floating necropolis of Naxxramas, bringing that corrupted Ashbringer with him. Back in Vanilla WoW, when we stormed Naxxramas and defeated the Four Horsemen, the corrupted Ashbringer could actually drop as loot. If you were ever lucky enough to get the sword and then walked into the cathedral wing of the Scarlet Monastery with it equipped, it triggered a hidden scripted event. Instead of attacking you like normal, the fanatical Scarlet Crusaders kneeled in respect, and Scarlet Commander Reno Mograine welcomed you in as a hero. But this kind of homecoming was cut short when the spirit of the father, Alexandros Mograine, suddenly manifested from inside the blade, confronted his son, and struck him dead for his betrayal. What makes this a good Iceberg entry here is that of course it is a hidden scripted event, but also the fact that this lore doesn't really align with the story from the official World of Warcraft Ashbringer comic series that came a few years later. It wasn't a player like us who took the corrupted Ashbringer from Naxxramas and took it back to Scarlet Monastery. It was Alexandros' younger son, Darian Mograine. Darian carried the weapon to the Scarlet Monastery to confront his brother, and when Reno attacked him, the sword acted out on its own, unleashing an aura of green flames that then revealed the spectral image of their father. Reno begged for mercy, but the ghost of Alexandros killed him anyway. Even though the comic became the official canon after the launch of World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, the original in-game event inside the Scarlet Monastery still remains one of the coolest hidden interactions Blizzard ever put into a dungeon. Next on our list is a Forsaken questline in the Hillsbrad foothills that was added back in the Cataclysm. Welcome to the Machine is the only quest in the entire game where you actually step into the shoes of a quest giver. When you arrive at the South Point Gate, High Executor Darthalia hands you some orders, and then tasks you with handing out those orders to 3 adventurers who travel through. The entire encounter is a brilliant piece of satire fourth wall breaking, where the devs had a chance to poke fun at the classic player stereotypes. The first person we encounter is Dumas, who represents the completely clueless noob. Then we have Orcus the Kingslayer, who's the kind of bored max level veteran, and then we have the famous Johnny Awesome, who represents the ultimate heirloom stacked alt, blasting through the quests. Darthalia gives us an insider look of what it's like to be a quest giver in the World of Warcraft. On top of the humour, the quest is also packed with pop culture references. The title of the quest and the opening dialogue pay homage to Pink Floyd's Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar. Orcus screams his own version of The Rock's famous WWE catchphrase, and Johnny Awesome drops a direct quote from the classic Old Spice commercials. Sticking with questing for a moment here, we have a hidden gem from the Burning Crusade called Digging Through Bones. This is an escort quest located in the Terakar Forest's Bone Wastes, where you assist a group of dwarven archaeologists from the Explorers League. As you guide the researchers through their dig site, they begin passing the time by bantering back and forth, openly mocking their boss, Chief Archaeologist Letol, for some of the most absurd theories he's come up with. They bring up his claim of finding a cure for a plague of the 20th century, a real-world immersion break here as the dwarves debate what the 20th century even is. And they also joke about the time their chief tried to convince everyone that they aren't actually real, that their entire world is just a simulation, built for the personal amusement of some higher beings. So in theory, the Explorers League have kind of discovered the Matrix. It's a fantastic, easily overlooked piece of banter hidden right in the middle of a small side quest. Moving on to our last entry on level 2, we have the infamous Corrupted Blood incident. This refers to an event that took over the entire game with the release of patch 1.7.0 when the Zul'Gurub raid was first introduced. In the lore, the Atalai priests had figured out how to summon Hakar the Soulflayer, the blood god, back into the world. Naturally, being the saviours of Azeroth that we are, we were sent into the ancient city to put a stop to him. But during that final encounter, Hakar would cast a debuff called Corrupted Blood. It dealt massive upfront damage, followed by a ticking damage over time effect that drained your health every 2 seconds. But what made this so lethal in the raid was the fact that the Corrupted Blood dot had the ability to spread to any nearby allies if you stood too close to them. Players quickly realised that if a hunter or warlock pet caught the debuff inside the raid and then was dismissed before the timer ran out, the game saved the infection on the pet. If that then same pet was resummoned later on in a highly populated area of a capital city, like the Commons in Ironforge or Orgrimmar's Valley of Strength, the affliction immediately started spreading to innocent players minding their own business. Low-level characters killed instantly by the damage. But to complicate the matter further, often enough, high-level players had enough health to survive the initial ticks, continuously passing the Corrupted Blood dot back and forth to anyone who revived nearby. Some players even took advantage of this situation and deliberately weaponized it, running the Corrupted Blood into crowds just to keep this chain reaction going. Blizzard then tried to stop it by restarting game servers on a rolling basis, but nothing fully worked until they finally released a patch about 3 weeks later. They made it so pets could no longer carry the effect, and locked the ability strictly inside the dungeon walls so it couldn't be brought out into the wider world. It remains one of the most famous unintentional events in gaming history. Moving on to level 3 of this knowledge iceberg, let's start this level off with a 2-for-1, Eastweald, Brightwood, and the Torch mechanic. Eastweald and Brightwood refers to 2 classic zones whose original names were completely changed after disastrous events reshaped their landscape completely. Eastweald was the original name of the region that existed before the Scourge swept through Lordaeron, an area sitting right below Quel'Thalas and then next to the Turrisful Glades. The second volume of the Chronicle books highlights Eastweald as a lush, vibrant heartland, and one of the most important places in the whole kingdom of Lordaeron. It was packed with humanity's most sacred sites, places like Light's Hope Chapel, Anderhall, Tyr's Hand, and the holy city of Stratholme. The too long didn't read version, Eastweald was the name for the zones that were transformed into the Eastern and the Western Plague Lands. If you want a small look of what Eastweald would have looked like, you can actually catch a glimpse of it during the Culling of Stratholme dungeon in the Caverns of Time. And in a very similar story, Brightwood was a peaceful forested area just south of Stormwind. It was basically an extension of the Elwyn Forest, and it held 2 main settlements, the Grand Hamlet and a spot that might sound a bit more familiar, Raven Hill. In the Warcraft Legends manga, there's a short story called Warrior Divided. It follows 3 Second War veterans investigating an unnatural darkness consuming Grand Hamlet in Brightwood. It turns out that the pitch-black shadow that was being cast over the zone was bleeding out from the Tower of Karazhan, of course caused by the corrupted guardian, Medivh. When Medivh was eventually taken down for his treason, his death triggered a massive blast of fell energy that permanently twisted the zone of Brightwood into the haunted, nightmarish zone we know today as Duskwood. And since Duskwood was then put under pretty much 24/7 darkness, the locals had to start carrying torches everywhere they went. Which brings us perfectly on to our next point in this level 3 double whammy. The next entry, the Lost Torch mechanic. This refers to a rumoured early concept from the game's development where players would actually need to carry torches to navigate dark zones like Duskwood or even when venturing out at night. While that idea was scrapped before Vanilla WoW officially launched, Blizzard ended up reviving a version of it many years later. In the Season of Discovery version of the Karazhan Crypts dungeon, the entire dungeon is in total darkness. Unless someone in the group carries the enchanted firebrand, a floating torch used to illuminate the rooms, you're all left wandering around completely blind. Moving on to another lost feature, next up we have Plainsrunning. Originally, Taurens didn't have any racial mounts. Instead, Blizzard were going to give Taurens Plainsrunning, a racial skill designed to let Tauren build up speed on their own 2 feet. On paper, it sounds pretty cool, but I think in practice, it was a bit more problematic than they thought. While normal mounts took 3 seconds to cast and then stayed active even if you stood still, Plainsrunning required you to continuously run forward for 10 full seconds just to reach top speed. Apparently, if you stopped moving for even a second, the buff would drop off and you had to start the 10-second build-up all over again. The developers then scrapped Plainsrunning right before the launch and gave Tauren access to the Kodo mounts at level 40 instead. The core idea of a racial mount speed ability wasn't completely dead though. Blizzard eventually revisited this concept years later with the Worgen racial running wild. Talking about Worgen brings us right to our next entry, the Forbidden Druid transformation known as Pack Form. Not long after the Great Sundering and the Legion's initial invasion of Azeroth, the Night Elves found themselves locked in another brutal war, the War of the Satyr. As the Night Elves struggled to push the demons who had remained on Azeroth back, a powerful druid named R'hllor Fangfire urged Malfurion Stormrage to let them use Pack Form. Pack Form allowed the druids to shapeshift into a massive wolf, tapping into the wild rage and energies of the ancient wolf wild god, Goldrin. The problem though was that this form was almost impossible to control. Desperate for victory against the satyrs, R'hllor ignored Malfurion's warnings not to use it, and then led packs of these wolf druids into battle anyway. But just as Malfurion feared, the druids slowly lost their humanity to their feral instincts. R'hllor teamed up with a priestess called Belisra, and together they forged a magical artifact called the Scythe of Elune, hoping its powerful energies would be able to help them master the Pack Form. Instead, it backfired catastrophically. The power of the Scythe twisted the druids of the pack into the very first Worgen. These manic, newly formed Worgen then tore through both the demons and the other Night Elves, spreading their curse through bites. Realizing the threat that they posed, Malfurion used the Scythe of Elune to seal the Worgen away inside the Emerald Dream, banishing the Pack Form from druidic teachings forever. I'm now starting to realize that most of level 3 has been related to Duskwood, and it's unintentional, I promise. So let's move on to something totally unrelated to Duskwood. Next up on the iceberg we have the Unseen of Duskwood. These were level 49 to 51 neutral, completely invisible mobs that haunted both Raven Hill in Duskwood and the ruins of Lordaeron above the Undercity. Because they were invisible to the naked eye, the vast majority of us players had no idea that we were even standing right next to them. The Unseen wouldn't bother you if you walked right past them, but they did pose a hidden danger. If a low-level player used an area of effect spell like Arcane Explosion, they could accidentally pull these high-level ghosts that they couldn't even see and get instantly annihilated. Only players with a true stealth detection could see them, like Warlocks using Detect Invisibility. They were actually placed right there for the Warlocks, so they could easily farm high-level soul shards in a low-level zone, serving as a quirky, useful little Easter eggs for years until Blizzard eventually wiped them out when the world was revamped in Cataclysm. Okay, moving away from Duskwood now. Next up we have the Jar of Ashes. On an isolated cliff on the far eastern edge of the Hellfire Peninsula, you can find a skeleton alongside a small interactive jar of ashes. Interacting with that jar opens a dramatic monologue. The note reads like a deeply bitter, fourth wall breaking vent from someone who is either overworked or burnt out and being consumed by a relentless grind. Whether you interpret it as a dark piece of outland lore from a character or a subtle, intentional fourth wall break from a dev, it still remains a cool little hidden item that not many players know is there. Next up on level 3, we have Elling Trias predicting the Cataclysm. This refers to a couple of easily overlooked lines of dialogue during one of the longest, best written storylines in early World of Warcraft. The massive investigation into Stormwind's corrupt nobility that joins together the Defias Brotherhood, the Leskavar incident, and the missing diplomat quest lines. During the investigation, Stormwind intelligence leader Matthias Shaw sends you to gather intel from Elling Trias, who happens to be both the city's master cheesemonger and also a key informant. When you ask him about the Defias connection, Elling replies, "The Defias Brotherhood, you say? Well, you're certainly the bearer of wonderful news, aren't you? Next you're going to tell me that Deathwing is still alive and attacking the city." And just like that, a random cheesemonger in Vanilla WoW accurately predicted the exact plot of the Cataclysm expansion years prior. Remarkably as well, this isn't even the only prediction hidden in this questline. Immediately after that, Elling sends us to meet a gnome named Tyrion or Tyrion. He is secretly spying on the nobles in the Stormwind Keep. When you approach him, Tyrion snaps at us with his own prediction. What do you mean? What am I doing? I'm waiting for the next dark portal to open. Back-to-back lines foreshadowing both the Burning Crusade and the Cataclysm expansions hidden right in plain sight since 2004. If you want to deep dive into the entire sprawling storyline behind the Defias Brotherhood and their connection to a corrupt Stormwind nobility, I have a 35-minute video covering it from start to finish. I'll leave it pinned in the comments, down in the description, and on a card at the end of this video that you can click. Moving down the iceberg, we now come to level 4, and we start with the Blingtron War. We all know the Blingtrons as the generous, gift-giving robots dropped by engineers, but inside the gifts that we get, you can find decrypted flavor text that reveals a dark secret. Somewhere deep beneath the surface of Azeroth, these units are locked in a desperate underground war against a mysterious rogue intelligence named IRT-0. This rogue intelligence has been corrupting the Blingtrons by damaging their generosity circuits, hence why we often receive gifts from these little robots. The surviving Blingtron network remain under strict orders to prevent any details of this war from reaching us on the surface. Any above ground unit that accidentally breaks character in front of us players is often destroyed by another nearby unit. So somewhere there's a secret robot war going on. Now I know I said at the start we were going to keep this iceberg focused purely on the lore and the world building, but I couldn't resist including this next entry, Poking the Eye. If you queue up for anything using the Looking for Group tool and then spam click the searching eye icon on your user interface, the eye will eventually turn red and get visibly agitated, as if you're literally poking it in the eye. A funny little hidden detail that somehow flew under my radar for years. And when I say spam click, you've got to really spam click. Next up, we have Kinndy Sparkshine's dad. This refers to Windle Sparkshine. Windle was a gnome mage of the Kirin Tor who we originally met in Dalaran's Silver Enclave. Every evening at 9 PM server time, Windle walked through the streets of Dalaran, lighting the city's lanterns with his wand. As he completed his route, a glowing magical image of a young gnome appeared above the lights. That projection was his daughter, Kinndy Sparkshine. Gifted in the arcane arts, Kinndy spent her days helping Jaina Proudmoore manage the city of Theramore. But her story came to a tragic end during Garrosh Hellscream's attack on Theramore. When the Horde dropped the mana bomb onto the city, Kinndy was caught directly in the blast. Following on from that tragedy, the Kirin Tor granted Windle special permission to enchant the street lamps of Dalaran so that every time he lit them, he got to see his daughter's smiling face one more time. When Dalaran was then later destroyed in the opening stages of the War Within, fortunately Windle and his wife survived the fall of the city. Players can now find him alongside his wife in Dornogal, where he continues to honour Kinndy's memory, ensuring her light never goes out. Next up on level 4, we have Agrant Sharpshot. Sharpshot is a member of the Jurassic Expedition, a group of explorers who set out to study the prehistoric Isle of Giants, located just off the northern coast of Kunlai Summit in Pandaria. Unfortunately for the crew, their zeppelin crashed directly onto the island, leaving the survivors stranded in a land full of dangerous dinosaurs. What makes this expedition so entertaining though is almost every single member of it is a direct homage to characters from the Jurassic Park, giving us another fun little pop culture reference tucked away on a dinosaur infested island. Next up, we have Mimiron's Experiments, a little known piece of lore where a Titan Keeper accidentally created another entire race of people. After helping the other keepers bring down the old gods and defeat the Black Empire, Mimiron played a massive role in the ordering of Azeroth, shaping the world as we know it today-ish. While he's well known for creating brilliant technological marvels like the Mechanomes and a lot of the machines in Ulduar, a much lesser known piece of lore is about his science experiments with a raw mineral called Kajamite. Curious about its properties, Mimiron began exposing various native creatures to this ore, and he then quickly discovered that it drastically boosted their intelligence. One of his early test subjects were a small primitive race that roamed the forests around Ulduar. These creatures underwent a radical transformation and evolved into a brand new, hyper-intelligent race, the Goblins. Unfortunately for them, when the Great Sundering tore the world apart thousands of years later, the Goblins were completely cut off from their Kajamite supply. Within just a few generations, that boosted intellect started to fade away. The Goblins eventually ended up taking refuge on the Isle of Karazhan, setting the stage for their modern story that we know today. Our final entry on level 4 of this iceberg is the Eranikus Dead End. This refers to a questline that begins inside the Sunken Temple and ends on a massive abrupt cliffhanger that was never finished. The quest starts when you kill the Shade of Eranikus in the Temple of Atal Hakar and loot the essence of Eranikus. Upon picking it up, the dragon's voice speaks into your mind, begging you to take the gem to an essence font inside his lair so the green dragonflight's magic can purge his corrupted mind. Except when you place the gem inside the font, things go horribly wrong. The font itself is tainted, causing Eranikus to scream in agony as he realizes he's trapped in a nightmare, begging you to seek out the green dragonflight for more help. You then travel the Swamp of Sorrows to meet Etharius, who then accepts the gem and tasks you with travelling all the way to Eastern Winterspring to consult a human spirit medium named Umbrance the Spirit Speaker. Umbrance agrees to help you communicate with the dragon, but tells you he needs a stolen device before he can do anything, and that's literally where the questline stops. Just a complete dead end in the middle of quite an interesting arc. The questline and the dungeon itself was then revamped during the release of the Cataclysm expansion, and that dead end quest can no longer be started in retail WoW. And finally, we've made it to level 5, the deepest, darkest floor of our Warcraft knowledge iceberg. First up on level 5, we have the Flowpicker Clan. Back in Warcraft 2, the term Flowpicker Clan was an internal codename in the game files for the orcs that were assigned to the blue team. It was never meant to be anything more, as it never made it into the game. But during the Warlords of Draenor beta, Blizzard started dropping hints that this Flowpicker Clan might actually be out there. In that beta, players could find items called the Mysterious Flower. Blizzard then pulled these flowers out before the launch of the expansion, and they never made it into the game. But this mysterious Flowpicker clan made a comeback in the Dragonflight expansion. During the Orc Heritage questline, a mysterious orc briefly pops up, whispers, "You saw nothing," slips a flower into your bag, and disappears. So a third piece of evidence suggesting that this Flowpicker clan might actually be out there. Speculation-wise, this clan kind of makes sense in the lore of ancient Draenor. It was a planet that was completely overrun by an aggressive, hyper-evolved plant life. It's very possible that this stealthy clan earned their name by hunting and harvesting Draenor's deadly plant life. And maybe they even become so good at operating in the shadows that we don't even know they exist. If you want to dive deeper into the wild plant lore of ancient Draenor, you can check out my Zangarmarsh video linked below, where we go over it in much more detail. I've been dreading getting to this part because I cannot pronounce this word properly. Next up, we have Dwarves Are Not Dwarves. If you assumed that the dwarven race in World of Warcraft got their name simply because they are named after the classic mythological fantasy archetype, you'd actually be mistaken. The truth behind it, the dwarves were being called dwarves long before they were even flesh and blood dwarves. And again, bear with me on the pronunciation and where this is going. In the third book of the War of the Ancients trilogy, The Sundering, Malfurion Stormrage meets two ambassadors who had answered the call to arms against the Burning Legion, Holn High Mountain representing the Tauren tribes, and Dungard Ironcutter representing the Titan-forged Earthen race. When introduced, Malfurion makes a conscious effort to remember that Dungard refers to his people as the Earthen. Before this meeting, Malfurion only knew these stocky stone beings by the derogatory term the Night Elves had used to describe them, which happened to be the word dwarf. This means the Earthen were being called dwarves 10,000 years ago, long before the Curse of Flesh ever transformed the ancient Titan-forged Earthen into the mortal race that we can play as today. Somewhere down the line, these devolved Earthen must have adopted the Night Elven insult and embraced it as their actual identity. So in a weird twist of lore, the Night Elves technically named the Dwarves. Now moving on to something a little easier to explain, and I think this might be a little bit more known than I think. Next up we have Ladimore's life. Ladimore's life refers to the tragic backstory of Morgan Ladimore, a noble paladin who fought alongside Uther the Lightbringer during the Third War. Leaving his wife Lys and their children behind, Morgan endured years of brutal warfare up in Lordaeron, holding on to that single hope of one day returning home to his family in the lands of the Kingdom of Stormwind. But when he finally made it back down, he found his homeland had been corrupted into the woods of Duskwood. His home was in ruins, and no one in Darkshire could tell him where his family had gone. Refusing to give up hope, Morgan searched every farm in the zone. But as he passed by the Ravenhill Cemetery, a sinking feeling led him to inspect the graves. and that's where he uncovered the headstones. Lys Ladimore, beloved wife and mother. Shattered by the grief of this, Morgan snapped. He drew his blade and began wildly hacking at the tombstones in a blind rage. When 3 cemetery attendants rushed over to stop him, Morgan turned on them in his madness, mistaking them for enemies, and then killing them. When his mind finally cleared, the horror of what he had just done washed over him. Unable to live with the guilt of murdering innocent people, Morgan pulled out his knife and... Violating everything he stood for as a paladin, his soul could not rest. He later rose again as the restless undead threat vanilla players know all too well as Morladim, the undead monstrosity sentenced to patrol Duskwood for an eternity. On a lighter and more cheesy note, the next entry on this list, the cheesemakers of Azeroth know about planet Earth? This next one is a bit of a silly entry, but while digging around researching on Reddit, I stumbled upon a hilarious recurring theory. The cheesemakers and bakers of Azeroth are somehow aware of planet Earth. The evidence is that they name their dairy and baked goods after actual real-world Earth places, like the items Alterac Swiss, the Chilton Stilton, and then there's the High Fiber Gouda. Even though World of Warcraft is packed with real-world pop culture references, strictly speaking, the average citizen of Stormwind or Orgrimmar should have absolutely no idea what Swiss cheese actually is. And finally, we've now reached the very bottom of this iceberg with our final entry, the tragic fate of Wu Ping. Most vanilla players will probably remember Wu Ping as the bare-chested weapon master stationed near the Stormwind auction house, responsible for teaching players how to wield everything from daggers to polar arms and two-handed swords. When the Cataclysm overhauled the game and completely removed weapon skills, Wu Ping was stripped of his purpose, and then quietly deleted from the game during the pre-patch. While most of us barely noticed he was gone, one dedicated player wasn't about to let a local Stormwind legend vanish without answers. So they reached out to a game master to see what happened to the master Wu Ping. Remarkably, the game master replied with a short story. When Deathwing descended upon Stormwind during the Cataclysm, it was none other than Master Wu Ping who stepped up to defend the city. As civilian buildings were burning and the citizens fled in terror, the topless weapon master went toe-to-toe with the Black Dragon. Enraged and severely injured, Deathwing then took to the skies to escape, with Wu Ping still hanging onto his sword for dear life as the dragon fled into the horizon. The current whereabouts of Wu Ping have remained unknown ever since. And that brings us to the very end of our World of Warcraft Knowledge Iceberg. As promised earlier on, if you want to hear the full story behind the greatest conspiracy in Warcraft history, see how the Defias Brotherhood, the Missing Diplomat and the Great Masquerade quest lines all tie together, you can check it out by clicking this video card right here.